And then what about COVID? What if you get COVID as a crew member? Hey sailors, welcome back to Cruising as Crew. My name is Lucy and today we're going to be discussing what happens if you get ill when you are working on board a cruise ship. But before we start, please press like and subscribe for more cruise ship content, and if you have any video suggestions or questions, please let me know in the comments down below, and also you can DM me over on Instagram at Cruising as Crew. But as for now, let's get into the video. Firstly, I just want to acknowledge the sleep video I put out the other day. It's basically a sound of the waves and a picture that I took on a cruise ship. And the reason I made it is I really like falling asleep listening to the waves. Before I go to bed, I'll stick a YouTube video on of wave sounds and listen to that. So I just thought I'd have a go at making my own. A few of you really like it, and a few of you have said, you know, you've listened to it before you've gone to sleep and it sent you off to sleep, which is great because that's exactly what I use it for. A few of you are like, what the hell is this? So I just wanted to acknowledge it, that I'm not going crazy. It was just something I wanted to try out. And if you do struggle sleeping, go to bed, put the video on, and yeah, you can fall asleep listening to the sound of the waves. But anyway, let's get into what this video is actually about. As a crew member, you're probably going to be spending 6 to 10 months on board a cruise ship. And whilst we all hope that you stay happy and healthy when you are working on board, there is of course a chance that you are going to come down with something, whether that is a cold like I've got now, the batch of flu, you might need a tooth filling, might have toothache, you could break a bone, all sorts can happen. So what happens if this happens when you're on a cruise ship? Well, firstly, when you start working on a cruise ship, you immediately become the company's responsibility. So this means that the company is going to pay for any medical care you require while you are working for them. So if you need a tooth filling, the doctors on board are going to organise for you to visit a dentist when you're in port. You're going to get the tooth filled and that is going to be paid for by the company. If you come down with tonsillitis and you need some antibiotics, the company are going to pay for the antibiotics that you need to get better. So there's no need to worry about medical costs when you are going to work on board a cruise ship. But obviously there's such a wide array of things that could happen to you while you're working on board, and I'm going to try and cover them based on their severity. So if you come down with a cold, just a generic basic cold, obviously it might not be the same nowadays because any symptoms they're going to take a hell of a lot more seriously than they would have done 2 years ago. But just generally speaking, if you come down with a cold and you're tested for COVID and it is just a cold, you're going to be expected to persevere and keep working through it unless it's contagious. But obviously the medical team are not going to send you back to work if it's contagious. When you first get on board a cruise ship, you're going to have safety trainings and whatnot, but one of the first trainings that you are going to have is from the medical staff, and they're basically going to tell you this: if you throw up or get diarrhea at any point, you are to go directly to your cabin and call 999, which is the medical team on board. It's like their hotline. It's the emergency line. The reason is, if you're vomiting or you have diarrhea, then you've most likely got something that is contagious. And if you have anything that is contagious, you are going to be confined to cabin. Now, just speaking a little bit more about vomiting and diarrhea, it is really, really important that you do go directly to your cabin, and you can get fired if you are found to have vomited or diarrheaed and then gone back to work and just carried on as normal, or not called the medical team. It's so important that you call the medical team as soon as this happens, because they are obviously going to try and stop the spread. Because as we all know, as soon as something starts spreading on a cruise ship, it's really difficult to stop the spread. So as soon as you vomit or diarrhea, you're going to go straight to your cabin. So from there, you are going to call 999, you're going to speak to a doctor, and they are going to try and identify what's going on with you, whether it's food poisoning or whether it's flu. And once they have identified it, they are going to recommend what you should do next. Now, if it is flu or if it is anything contagious, you will be confined to cabin. What this means is that, well, what it says, you are confined to cabin. You cannot leave under any circumstances. You do not leave your cabin to get food. You do not leave your cabin to get fresh air. You do not leave your cabin to go to drills. The only reason that you would leave your cabin is if the ship went into a state of real emergency. but that's not going to happen. So basically, if you're confined to cabin, you stay in that cabin until the doctor tells you you can leave. If you're at home, you have a job on land and you get a bit ill and then you have a few off days, sometimes it can be quite nice because you're like, oh, I'll just lounge around on the sofa at home and eat loads of shit and watch loads of food and feel sorry for myself. Being trapped in your house feeling ill is a lot different to being trapped in a cabin feeling ill. I've been confined to cabin twice in my life when I was really ill, and they were honestly the worst times of my life. So if you can avoid being confined to cabin, then do so, but unfortunately people get ill, it happens. This is why it's so important to have a hard drive full of films, because if you do get confined to cabin, you are going to need something to keep you occupied, because believe me, the crew TV channel is not going to do the job. When it comes to food and drink, the doctors are going to deliver food. So they're going to deliver food that is going to help whatever illness you have. So it might be rice and a banana. It could be something really like shit like that. Or they're going to deliver something quite nice. The good thing about being ill is you can order room service because you're not allowed to leave the cabin. That's not all bad, but that does depend on what cruise line you work for actually. So don't quote me on that. But that's only a good thing if the doctor hasn't told room service to only feed you rice and a banana. If that's the case, then you're fine. You can have pizza, you can have chips, you can have whatever you want. And you will usually be confined to cabin maybe 2 to 3 days, but that is what's typically going to happen if you get ill on board a cruise ship. You're just going to be confined to cabin for a few days. It's really boring, it's really rubbish because you're feeling ill and you're alone in a cabin, probably without a window. So it is shit, but it's just one of those things. But the cruise lines have to deal with illnesses this way because there's so many people in such a small space that if you don't lock people up immediately, you know, within an hour, a quarter of the ship could have whatever illness you have, as we saw with COVID. So you have to do your bit, and if you feel ill, you have to make sure that you take yourself either directly to the cabin or straight to the medical centre. They were strict on this before COVID, so I'll be interested to see how, how strict they are on it now. It's already a fireable offence if you throw up and have diarrhoea and don't report it straight away. However, I've never heard of anyone actually getting fired for not reporting their illnesses. I think it's just something they say to encourage you to actually report it as soon as possible. However, now, after COVID, if you don't report your symptoms, you will get fired. And how embarrassing would that be to go home and be like, I got fired because I didn't admit to having diarrhoea fast enough. Now, what happens if it's something more severe? So what happens if you break your leg, your arm, if you have chronic seasickness? Which doesn't happen very often, by the way. Well, as you may have expected, you will be sent home. Not because you're being fired or you're in trouble, but obviously if you have a broken leg and you're a waiter, you aren't going to be able to work for the next 4 months. And they would rather send you home, have someone there to replace you so you can go home and get better, and then they'll have you back when your leg is healed. As I said, the company are responsible for you, so if you broke your leg or your arm or whatever while you were at work doing things you should be, then obviously they are going to pay for your flights home, they're going to pay for your return to the ship, there's not going to be an issue. However, if you went paragliding in port and you broke your leg, then don't think you won't be fired, but you will have to pay for your own flight home. So if you are a little bit of a daredevil and you think that in these ports, I mean, when everything gets back to normal and crew can actually go out in the ports, you like to go quad biking and go paragliding and do all these exciting things, then I would recommend getting like some health insurance, just like you would get when you go on holiday, just so if something happens when you're on holiday, you're not completely screwed. Same thing on a cruise ship. But I mean, if you're not and you know that you're just gonna chill, and if you're gonna break your leg anywhere, it's gonna be on the ship, then what about COVID? What if you get COVID as a crew member? Well, obviously you're going to be confined to cabin. Now, they're telling people in England that you have to self-isolate for 2 weeks if you have COVID or have been around anyone with COVID. Being confined to cabin for 2 weeks would be, well, I suppose I'm going to have to do it, aren't I? Because when I join when I go back on Virgin, I'm going to have to quarantine for the first 2 weeks of my contract and then get to work. So I'll let you know how that is. But yeah, you will have to go into quarantine for 2 weeks, which won't be fun. However, because they're doing all the tests, everyone's going to be vaccinated, it's going to be so unlikely that there is a COVID outbreak on board. It's really not something I'm worried about because of all the precautions that they've put in place. But yeah, I mean, if you get COVID, you will just have to confine to cabin. So make sure you get that hard drive full of movies that I've told you to get before. And if you are joining a ship soon, I'm a big fan of thinking of the worst case scenario, because that way I'm prepared if it happens. So I have thought about, okay, what happens if I get COVID and I am confined to cabin for 2 weeks? Well, I've got my hard drive full of movies. I've obviously got this YouTube channel that will keep me busy. I mean, this is if I'm not like really ill with COVID, lay in bed, you know, half dead. Obviously, if I have COVID and I'm like symptomless, I will still have to confine to cabin, so I'm going to need something to keep me occupied. So I want you to think about what you are going to do in those 2 weeks if you're confined to cabin. Hopefully it will never happen, but it might happen and you'll need to be prepared. So just give it a thought before you join your cruise ship. But anyway guys, I really hope you have enjoyed this video and you found it helpful. If you have, then please let me know in the comments, and also if you have any video suggestions or questions, you can let me know down below or DM me over on Instagram at Cruising as Crew. But I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day and I will see you in the next video guys. Bye!